Let me tell you the story of education in Alaska, as we see it, through the eyes of Alaska's first people.
After breakfast, time to go to school. Even Eskimo children hate to be tardy. The first thing is the oath of allegiance to the United States.
I must warn you, for our people, this is not an easy story to tell. It's one of broken promises, disrupted dreams, and buried truths, the facts of which are only now coming into focus. But we believe the ending is not yet written. This story was lived by so many of our ancestors, our mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. It's a story that drifts quietly through our schoolhouses, our streets, and our communities. It lives silently in the hearts of our elders and our youth. It moves, unspoken, through our timeless generations. Perhaps until now. First, we must look into the fragments of history and start, as most stories do, at the beginning. 1784. The first white settlement in Alaska is formed by Russians at Three Saints Bay, Kodiak Island. A church and school are immediately established. The school is bilingual with studies in both Russian and native languages. 1867. Western churches begin establishing schools throughout Alaska. Outside missionaries and the Russian Orthodox Church build schools under a toxic ideology expressed through this clear racist statement: kill the Indian, save the child. 1878. The first U.S. boarding school is established in Sitka by Presbyterian missionaries. Native children are separated from their families and communities in order to be immersed into Euro-American culture. Students are not allowed to speak native languages or wear traditional clothing. Here, they are assimilated into Western civilization. 1888. The Board of Education in Alaska is directed to prescribe a course of study for all government schools. 1900. An act of Congress permits communities with a population of 300 or more to establish their own public schools. Many Native communities across Alaska do not qualify. In many cases, this leads to the consolidation of villages based on the false promise of managing their own schools. 1905. The Nelson Act provides for the establishment of schools for white children and children of mixed blood outside of incorporated towns. This would pave the way for a racially segregated education system in Alaska for decades to come. 1917. Federal boarding schools are established in Alaska at White Mountain and Eklutna. Additional boarding schools are established by Catholic, Moravian, and Lutheran churches, which often banish Native cultural practices and enforce Western beliefs. 1932. Soon after full control of education for Alaska Native people is transferred to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, Wrangell Institute Boarding School opens. Eventually, this boarding school will be for elementary students from communities with no school facilities. Children are forcibly sent here to this residential school from their home villages. 1947. Mount Edgecombe Boarding School opens in Sitka. When Mount Edgecombe is full, Alaska Native students are sent to boarding schools out of state. This time period marks a change in philosophy for the BIA, which progressively seeks to remove Native children from their home communities and encourage them not to return. At boarding schools, Native youth are detached from their families and often stripped of their culture and language. Thousands of Native youth are subjected to horrific abuse. Many hundreds of children will die, and others simply disappear or never make it home. Lives caught in a system built to separate a generation of Native children from their natural-born culture. 1950. The Johnson-O'Malley Act finally provides for the transfer of schools in Alaska from federal control to state, local, and territorial management. 1971.
They united in proclaiming their ancestral land rights.
The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is signed into law.
And this time, The nation listened.
ANCSA is intended to resolve Alaska Native land claims and stimulate economic development and self-determination. 1975, the United States Congress enacts the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, designed to promote and enable self-governance for tribes across the U.S. 1976, two teenagers, Molly Hooch from the village of Imanuk and Anna Tobaluk from Nunapitchuk, sue Alaska for failing to provide local high schools in Alaska Native communities. The case is settled, providing for the establishment of high school programs in 126 villages. In the coming decades, more than 100 Native communities would create or expand local school programs. 1994. Alaska tribes are formally recognized by Congress. 1999.
All but those Alaskans living in the most remote areas have schools readily available to them.
From 1999 to 2012, prolonged court cases finally lay bare a truth that our people know too well, that the state's public education system and school funding model is racially discriminatory against Alaska Native people and in violation of the Federal Civil Rights Act. 2022. The state of Alaska formally recognizes all of Alaska's 229 tribes. It's not easy to hear the truth, as our people have lived it. Decades of disruption and abuse, countless lives changed, potential lost, and families shattered. Trauma that continues to ripple through our generations today. We know the past, and we know where it has brought us to. And I ask you, have we come far enough? Have we truly begun to write our own future? The story our past tells us is about an education system imposed upon Alaska's first people rather than one built alongside of us, in favor of an education system that too often treats us like foreigners in our homeland, forcing our people to abandon tradition and assimilate to a Western culture. Although we cannot change the past, it's not too late to build our future. You see, 1784 wasn't the real beginning of this story. Our indigenous education system goes much further back. Our people have been building, teaching, and sharing knowledge for thousands of years, long before Western recorded time, and long before our children were taken away to far-off schools. The time has come for all of us to hear the wisdom of our people. For the last year, Cook Inlet Tribal Council has traveled to or engaged nearly every region of Alaska and listened to more than 600 stories, hopes, and dreams of our people. We've heard each one of their voices, proud and passionate. The message is clear. This is what our people want Alaska's education system to provide for our youth. Multi-generational learning. The story of our people lives in the hearts of our elders. Our education system should invite elders into the classroom as paid teachers and culture bearers. We must let our classrooms echo with the wisdom of our elders. We must create a path for our youth to learn from prior generations. We must let the voices of our elders illuminate a path towards a better future. Language and culture. Our native languages are our identity. As they die, so too does a piece of us. Our schools and classrooms should celebrate and teach the oral traditions of our people. Our education system can help preserve native languages in the hearts and minds of our youth, teaching them to take pride in their heritage. We must also share the beauty, complexity, and depth of our language with non-native students to reduce cultural barriers. Tribal connections. Our education system doesn't exist in isolation. We must forge stronger relationships between teachers, administrators, tribal leaders, culture bearers, and members throughout our communities. We must align our education goals and deepen the bonds that unite us in our shared efforts to prepare the next generation for a thriving future. Heal from trauma. Despite the pain, we must not shy away from our past. We must acknowledge and teach, without distortion, the past educational policies and decisions that have impacted generations of our people. Those whose lives were disrupted must be seen and heard. True progress only comes if we honor the stories of our past while refusing to repeat it. This is what our people have told us. The lessons of our ancestors are calling us forward. Despite decades of abuse, assimilation, trauma, and broken dreams, the opportunity is not lost. Another generation of our children is waiting on us. There is still time for a new vision. There is still time for bold decisions. Our future ancestors are counting on us to make the right choices. They are ready for us to pick up the tools of the modern world and fuse them with our traditional wisdom. There's only one question that remains. For those of you with a seat at the table, the decision makers, the policy writers, the ones who, like so many before you, seek to write our children's future, there's just one question to think deeply about with all that we now know. What are we going to do next?